foot-pounds ballistic at muzzle, at target, point of impact, and after pass-through, what is the foot-pound rating? I'm going to go into ballistics really quickly here to prepare you for the worst here, physics. If you fire a .22 caliber, let's say 50 grain, 22 rimfire bullet, and it's coming out at 1,000 feet per second. We're rounding numbers off here. It has a certain foot-pound rating based on its mass, speed, at muzzle. At target, which will be lower because part of its energy is absorbed in the air, at target it will have a potential foot-pound rating, or total energetic capability, or potential, just before hitting the target. Upon hitting the target, it will dump some of that energy, a lot or a little. After it passes through the target, or doesn't, it will have expended a certain amount of energy in the target. Depending on the target, whether it's water, silly putty, mud, or a box full of air, it will or will not have an effect on the target. And more importantly, it may continue on to hitting another target. Now, the reason I'm using ballistics here is that most of the people that I see, not necessarily all of them, that complain about energy potential versus energy absorption versus potential downrange are very accurate when it comes to bullets. They're annoyingly pedantic about it. But when you talk about 5G not being a source of radiation that can damage oxygen molecules, and when you talk about Fukushima radiation from a ridiculously long period of time ago, or Chernobyl not being a source of danger, they flip their shit because they don't want to apply logic. Forbid TV. I challenge thee. We won't discuss that. Yes, that's a reference to a certain movie with a guy, on a bomb going, yeehaw. So let's go. Radioactivity measurement in becquerels. I said barracles because people were calling them barracles like NyQuils. And also curies, which is named after the person who created the unit. Curie. Madame Curie. Are equivalent to each other. But we don't use anything but becquerels anymore because it's a measurement of radioactivity. Potential. A becquerel is referring to, very specifically, the number of times you can detect, that depends on you being able to detect it, the number of times you can detect any sample of material producing an event that would be equivalent to a radioactive, like a nuclear reaction, a nuclear breakdown, an annihilation of an atom, or just it splitting. Could be anything. If you have 6 tons of waste material from a mine and you're getting 1 becquerel, that's 1 click per second. A curie is 37 billion clicks per second like that. Now, you could get that from a very large sample, which may mean that on the whole it's not really that radioactive material. It may be just tailings from a mine, or it can be from a pinpoint that would literally fit into an eye of a needle that you would use to kill some dissident in Russia that Putin had nothing to do with, apparently, to some of you very patriotic people who want to defend a commie. What about the gray and rad? Well, 1 gray is 100 rads, and we can just stop right there. A gray versus a rad. Why even? Well, they're the absorbed dose. They're only equivalent to each other because it's the amount absorbed by the target. And the becquerel is like the foot-pound rating over here. Well, no, it's specifically just the bullet. It doesn't tell you how heavy it is or how fast. Yes, some of these annihilations produce slow and fast-moving, light and heavy. You have to know about that. What about dose equivalent? It's in sieverts or rem. Well, 100 rem is 1 sievert, and 1,000 millisieverts is 1 sievert. That seems a lot less useful all of a sudden. Dose equivalent. And then we have to consider my favorite expression here. It's a 50 grain bullet coming out of a gun, not a gram, 50 grain. If it's sitting on your skin and not moving, what if it's moving really slowly, like I'm pushing it? There needs to be a certain minimum speed or it isn't going to do anything, But no, cumulative dose or trace. So anyway, dose or traces, dosage, trace amount. It's a joke. Shut up. Anyway, next. So, a rad is a unit of absorbed radiation dose or potentially absorbed dosage if you're talking about it coming from a source, but you haven't been absorbing any of it. A dose that also defined as a dose that could cause, hypothetically, 100 ergs of energy. That's the E in E equals mc squared if you're not aware of it. To be absorbed by a gram of matter. If you have a gram of mass, whether it's lead, which is really tiny, or air, which is a box, if it is able to absorb potentially 100 ergs of energy. Okay, let's talk foot, pounds, and bullets again. There's another way of measuring it. Joules. Yeah, joules of energy is the equivalent to foot, pounds of energy. Total impact force. And 0.01 joules into 1 kilogram of mass has 1 rad worth of energy. And that's literally identical to the measurement you use for bullets. I'm using it. That's per kilogram, not of the object, because the Joule rating is how heavy it is and how fast it is for the bullet. This is for the target. If you're 100 kilograms, 1 rad would be spread out differently than if you're a 1 kilogram hamster, which would be a really fat hamster. 100 roentgens is equal to 1 sievert, based on biological effects of ionizing radiation, proton radiation, photon radiation, and what it might be, and the beam energy type and strength. Okay, now we're going into, well, yeah, if you shoot a 50 grain projectile at a 200-pound man and it's a marshmallow, it's not going to do the same thing as depleted fucking uranium. But then again, what if you took the entire mass of the marshmallow and compacted it down to a pin? Because it's the same mass, now it's got a tiny surface area. But wouldn't it just pass through and not do any damage? There's an actual gun that was made at one time that used a sewing needle, or very close to it. It's a large sewing needle. It actually used hardened needles that were used for phonographs in the old days. The becquerels, that big thing with the trumpet on it. And it would fire them, and the thing that was found about it, it was really good for, high speed, and it would hit things and almost burn up in the atmosphere, but it would just go through things. Some things would not notice the puncture. It would do virtually no damage because it didn't transfer any energy. If you shoot a box full of air, or just the air between you and the target, the air isn't being injured. Become the air. Well, you probably are. You notice X-rays go through you, right? They only get absorbed by bone. Gamma rays have absorption and transmission characteristics. They don't do anything sometimes. Radio signals are body permeable by definition, including 5G. Your body doesn't absorb anything. But once you get beyond a certain level, some absorption can happen, or more accurately, disruption. A roentgen in air dumps 0.877 rads. Hey, we have the rad coming back. And it also dumps 0.79 rads into soft tissue and 4 to 1 rad in bone. So how many rads was it starting off with? Now we can do a bad calculation. Nobody in the industry that has to deal with these measurements for doing things like, yes, this is a methodology, radiation hardening metals. Like you would harden a firing pin in a gun, you can use radiation apparently. Or radiation hardening food by killing off the bacteria in it. Nobody uses rads because it's dumb. But okay, let's use the rad measurement because it's used in movies, TV, and novelizations. A roentgen in air only is 0.877 rad. 87% to 90% of a rad. That's also a REM, but only in air. And in air, a sievert, the measure we use for testing it against human beings, it's 0.00877 sieverts. It's almost a 1-to-1 ratio. So if 0.877 rad is 0.0087 sieverts, then a rad has to be, because we got two measurements here, because the other one had a different number for it, 0.01 sieverts to, or 10 millisieverts. Human exposure sieverts per year on average background radiation in the United States is 6 millisieverts per year. So if you're getting hit with a rad right now, you're being hit with double, almost 3 times what the radiation level is for an entire year. In Japan, it's lower, even though they were hit with a nuclear bomb. It's high in the United States because we hit our own country with more nuclear bombs. We did a bunch of testing here. Russia's even worse, and that's where Chernobyl is. Japan has Fukushima, and it has a 4 to 6 ratio of radiation compared to the United States because we dropped a bunch of bombs on ourselves. Worldwide, the average radiation level is half what it is in the United States. It's 3 millisieverts. So, 1 rad would be the equivalent, if you had exposure to it, of 10 millisieverts at that time. Or is that spread out over minutes? Well, let's continue. X-rays and gamma rays, because they're very different than the others, 1 rad is 1 rem and 10 millisieverts. Totally rational. If it's neutrons coming out of an atom that's splitting, and they do, 1 rad equals 5 to 20 rem, depending on energy level, meaning frequency. Energy level gets talked about a lot, but that just means frequency, up and down the scale. For neutrons, yes, neutrons can have a frequency at this point. That's 50 to 200 millisieverts. It's 20 times as bad of effect, potential, in air. Alpha radiation, that's helium nuclei, the pieces that come off of an atom that's splitting sometimes. 1 rad is 20 rem or 200 millisieverts. So a rad might be said to be anywhere from 10 to 200 millisieverts instead of just 10 millisieverts. But that's our range. So what's the background rating? The background rating, or background radiation, is measurement of the level of ionizing radiation present in the environment only at a particular location, and it's generalized, ignoring the types of radiation. Normally, this is measured per year because we can't measure it instantaneously. You can measure it equivalent to it instantaneously, but it's the total cumulative dose. That's that wording people use when they talk about everything. Oh, if you find out something's a low radiation, they talk about cumulative dose. Well, we're talking about cumulative dose, or tres. So the cumulative dose per year, normally, total, for an average human being, because our body contains all these different things that absorb at different ratios, it's 3 millisieverts in the rest of the world, 6 millisieverts in the United States, and 4 in Japan, because they got hit with only 2 bombs and we did more. In Russia, it's actually a different number depending on the area. Because it's so large, it's actually much larger than the United States. So they do put up signs about that. Now we go into the next. And depending on the type, you can or cannot tolerate it. If 6 millisieverts is background radiation in the United States per year, then it might be said that 0.6 all the way down to 0.03 rads is background radiation per year in the United States. And that's the end of the video. Now what caused me to do this? I looked up background radiation using all these notations, and this was the one that wasn't included. Because it's not a measurement of how much is emitted, it's a measurement of how much maximum the target would get by any source. It's a derivational thing. If I make a target out of styrofoam, it's not going to absorb as much energy as if I make it out of a slump of lead when I hit it with a bullet. On the other hand, if I hit it with X-rays, the lead absorbs more. You get the idea. On the Beach is a movie that talked about stable 23 rads of exposure, which would be upwards of a ridiculous amount of exposure compared to what it would be for, obviously, the 0.6 all the way down to 0.03 we're supposed to be exposed to for a full year. And then they got out of the submarine in the movie. That was that 23 rads a second or per year itself. What were they measuring? They didn't measure it. That's like saying that it's a certain number of electrons per second. That's a direct measurement, but what am I referring to? That's the important part. Links below in the description. Have a good day. Good luck with that.